a mother who has dedicated her entire life to her son. But when she needs help the most, it is her closest family who turn their backs on her. What happens when trust is betrayed to its absolute limits? My name is Elaine, and I have lived a full 65 years. If you look at my life from the outside, you might think that I have everything. A small, charming house in a quiet neighborhood, a garden full of color, a harmonious family. Everything seems perfect, with no cracks, no disruptions. But who can truly know what lies ahead in life? I retired a few years ago, and now I spend most of my time in the garden. I love the early mornings when the sunlight begins to peek through, and I can breathe in the fresh air. I walk out into the garden, watching the rose petals begin to bloom, the tomato plants start to bear fruit, the herbs I nurture with all my love. That feeling is like a tranquilizer, helping me forget my worries and making me feel that I'm still useful in a world where everything seems to be changing. But I haven't always lived just for myself. My son, David, has always been the most important person in my life. After my husband passed away, I poured all my love and energy into David. I promised myself that I would do everything I could to help him live a better life, so that he wouldn't have to endure the hardships I once did. David is my pride. I remember the days when he was a child, and we went through so many challenges together. Those years, I dedicated myself to teaching and caring for him. I wanted him to have a life that wasn't lacking, to feel loved. David is the only family I have left, so I love him even more and protect him. When David married Rebecca, I was overjoyed. This girl, although gentle on the outside, had a strength and independence that I truly respected. She loved my son, and that gave me peace of mind. I never thought anything could disrupt their relationship. Everything seemed too perfect. Occasionally, David and Rebecca would visit my house. Every time they did, I would cook their favorite dishes. I always felt happy when I saw them enjoying the meals I prepared. For me, it was the only way to show my love. I'm a mother who always wants to take care of her children. One evening, I was standing in the kitchen, cooking a familiar dish for the three of us. The smell of garlic and olive oil filled the house, making me feel warm and peaceful. I heard David and Rebecca talking in the living room. Their laughter echoed gently, creating a happy atmosphere. At that moment, I felt like everything was truly perfect. I felt like the happiest woman alive. As I brought out the dinner, Rebecca entered the kitchen with a soft smile. She always had a pleasant smile, but this time there was something in her eyes that I couldn't quite describe. She said, "Mom, I need your help with something. I found a beautiful set of furniture, but it's a bit expensive. Could you help us?" I looked into her eyes, sensing something strange. She had married David, had her own family now, but I always felt like I was the one who had to help them. I had gotten used to being the mother, the provider, the protector. Was I giving too much without receiving anything in return? "All right, I'll help you both," I replied, my hand instinctively reaching for my wallet and taking out some money. It was something I always did, and I didn't think much about it. When the meal ended, we sat at the table. The conversation was cheerful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It grew inside me, like there was something wrong, though I couldn't explain why. Then Rebecca said something I could never forget. "Mom, if you're not using your house, we could move in with you, right?" Her words, though seemingly casual, left me feeling a strange lump in my throat. I just smiled and told her, Come on, don't say that. But something inside me shifted at that moment. Could it really have been just a joke? The rest of the dinner passed in silence. The three of us sat there, but I no longer felt at peace. That feeling still lingered, like a shadow. After cleaning up, I sat in the garden, where I often find tranquility. But tonight, the peace was gone. There was no calm, no comfort. In the garden, I looked at the blooming roses, the flowers I had cared for so carefully every day. But my gaze didn't focus on those flowers. I thought about my son, my family, everything I had done. Had I been giving away everything too easily without receiving anything in return? Was I living a life that I no longer controlled? My mother once told me, when everything seems too perfect, it usually isn't the truth. At the time, I didn't understand what she meant, but now I do. Life is never as perfect as I thought. There are things that go unseen, things I've overlooked, cracks that I refuse to acknowledge. As I sat there in the darkness, I felt a strange anxiety. It was a worry about the future. Would everything stay like this forever? Would I continue living in the darkness of my own making? Or would I have a chance to change? That feeling of unease wouldn't leave me. And then I knew I couldn't keep living this way. I had to change. Maybe it was time for me to find myself again, to take back control of my life. The event began quietly, and no one could have predicted how the peaceful days in my life would be turned upside down. Perhaps we all want to believe that the relationships we've nurtured over the years will remain strong, but life has a way of unfolding that sometimes we can't control. It all started with a phone call. That morning, I was cleaning the kitchen after breakfast when my phone suddenly rang. On the other end of the line was David, my son. There was an unease I couldn't explain, making me pause for a moment. A call from my son should be a good thing, right? But David's voice today sounded strange. It seemed like he was trying to distance himself, and I didn't like it one bit. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" David's voice, though warm, had an aloofness to it, vague and distant. "Are you okay? How are things at work?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm, but inside, I couldn't stop feeling uneasy. This was the first time I had heard his voice sound so strange, even if just a little. "Yes, everything's fine, Mom," David replied quickly, then shifted the topic. "The wedding. It's almost done. Don't worry. Everything will be fine." I had known about David's wedding plans for a long time, but I had never been directly involved in the preparations. Whenever I asked about the details of the wedding, David would always avoid the topic, giving vague answers. And today, he spoke ambiguously again, as if he wanted to end the conversation as quickly as possible. I couldn't understand why my son was acting this way. His wedding wasn't a small event, so why not share it with me? Had I ceased to be important in his life? "David, why don't you tell me more about the wedding? I want to know too." I couldn't keep silent anymore. Part of me couldn't help but feel worried. "Well, it's really just a small ceremony, Mom. Nothing big." "Don't worry," David answered hastily, as if he didn't want to say anything more. His voice sounded tired and rushed, as if he was trying to escape this conversation. At this point, I felt that something was wrong. David had always shared everything with me, but today, he didn't want to say anything at all. This made me feel like I was being excluded, like an outsider in my own family. I tried not to think too much about it, but it kept nagging at me. When the call ended, I felt an odd emptiness. I stood silently in the living room, looking out the window with my mind full of thoughts. My relationship with my son might no longer be the same. I couldn't deny that feeling, even though I wanted to believe I was just being overly anxious. But the feeling inside me was growing clearer, as if an invisible wall was slowly building between David and me. The whole day passed with me unable to focus on anything. I wandered around the house, the unease following me like a shadow. And then, while I was cleaning in the bedroom, my eyes happened to fall on David's phone left on the table. I knew I shouldn't check my son's phone, but the impulse drove me to do so. Maybe I just wanted to find some reason to ease my anxiety. I knew it was a mistake, but in that moment, I couldn't hold back. When I opened David's phone, I wasn't looking for anything too deep, but what I found made me gasp. A message from Rebecca. The words in the message felt like a slap in the face. In it, Rebecca and David were discussing their upcoming vacation. They had planned a trip that I hadn't been told about at all. Not only that, they hadn't invited me to join. It was hard to believe. As a mother, I always thought I would be the first to know about significant events in my son's life. But now, I felt like an outsider. I couldn't stop rereading those messages, even though every word felt like a dagger to my heart. Rebecca and David, instead of sharing this important moment with me, had left me out. While I had always tried my best to help them, now I realized that they no longer needed me. They had each other, and I was no longer a part of their lives. I wondered, what did I do wrong? I had spent so many years caring for and loving them, trying to build a happy family. And now, I was being pushed aside. I set the phone down, my hands trembling. A mixture of pain and anger surged within me. I felt betrayed, like everything I had done, all the sacrifices I made for this family, had become meaningless. I began to wonder, had I loved them so blindly? Or had they just used me without thinking about my feelings? I couldn't sit still and endure this feeling any longer. I needed to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. I needed to talk to David. I couldn't keep living in this uncertainty. With trembling hands, I called my son. This conversation wouldn't be easy. I knew that, but I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. When David answered, his voice hadn't changed, but deep inside, I knew everything had changed. I asked about the vacation I had discovered in the message. David, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me about this trip? Didn't you invite me to join? He didn't answer immediately. His voice became awkward. Mom, it's just a private trip, really. Just a small ceremony. Nothing important. His words clearly showed he was avoiding the topic. I couldn't accept this answer. Couldn't accept the way he was talking about such an important event. I fell silent for a moment and then continued, David, I just want to understand why. Why did you do this? But he didn't answer, only remained silent. And then I knew I had the answer. We were no longer the family we once were. That wasn't the truth I wanted to face, but I had to accept it. At that moment, I didn't just feel pain. I felt deceived. I had spent my whole life loving them, but now I felt like I no longer mattered. The next day, I woke up later than usual. Not because I slept too long, but because I couldn't sleep. All night, I tossed and turned, my mind spinning with countless thoughts. Every detail of the conversation from yesterday, every text message I discovered, kept repeating in my head like an endless reel of film. And it made me feel as if a storm was about to sweep away everything I once thought was certain. I tried to get up and do my usual tasks to calm my mind, but everything seemed meaningless. The garden I had always loved, where I found peace, no longer gave me the feeling of safety it once did. I passed by the rose bushes I had nurtured since I first moved here, but even those flowers couldn't soothe the pain in my heart. The fresh morning air no longer felt pleasant. Everything felt heavy and cloudy, as if a dark cloud was hanging over everything. The peaceful moments in my life now seemed distant. I had spent my whole life taking care of this family, loving and protecting those I held dear. But now, I had to face the truth that perhaps those people no longer needed me. Or, at least, they didn't need me the way I thought. That was an incredibly painful feeling. I couldn't believe what I was feeling, but I couldn't deny that it was taking over my mind. I couldn't continue living in this uncertainty. As I sat down at the dining table, looking out the window at the clear sky, I still couldn't shake the jumbled thoughts in my mind. I thought about everything that had happened: David's phone call, the messages I had discovered, and everything they were doing without sharing it with me. I had sacrificed so much, yet now I was being pushed aside. I couldn't keep living like this. I needed to face the truth, and I needed to know why. I had waited too long for an answer, but now I couldn't wait any longer. I needed a meeting, a clear conversation, so I wouldn't have to live in this uncertainty anymore. So I decided to call David. A part of me told me not to do it, that I might be disappointed again, but I couldn't remain silent forever. If I didn't do something, I would never know the truth. And I couldn't continue living in this doubt any longer. When the phone rang, I felt a wave of anxiety rise within me. I should have felt calm calling my son, but now I felt as if I was facing an unavoidable challenge. David picked up, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "Mom, is something wrong?" His voice sounded awkward, as if he wasn't ready to face me. "David, I need to meet with you. I need to talk to you about the vacation you and Rebecca have planned. I don't understand why you didn't invite me to join." I couldn't stay silent anymore. My voice trembled slightly, but I couldn't stop. "Can you meet me?" I didn't wait for him to respond right away. It felt like a cold breeze spreading throughout the space. Finally, David answered reluctantly, as if he didn't want to talk about it. "Mom, it's really just a small trip. Rebecca and I just wanted some private time. It's not that you're not important." His words made me feel a lump in my throat. "But don't you understand? I just want to know why you didn't share this with me." "Did I do something wrong, David?" He didn't answer immediately. I could sense the avoidance in his voice, the anxiety. A part of me wanted to forgive him, wanted to believe that he didn't mean anything bad. But the other part of me couldn't accept this ambiguity. As a mother, I have the right to know, to be involved in the important moments of my child's life. "Mom, I'm sorry if you feel this way," David said, but I could hear the insincerity in his voice. "But really, it's just a private trip, nothing big." The lack of honesty in David's words only made me more disappointed. I could tell he didn't really want to share anything with me. The avoidance, the lack of openness, everything was gradually revealing a truth I didn't want to face. My son, the one I had loved for so many years, the one I had spent my life caring for, now treated me like a stranger. I felt a deep sadness in my heart. I couldn't accept this truth. What did I do wrong? Why were they treating me like this? Had I sacrificed too much, given everything for this family? only to be left behind. Rebecca, the wife I had once considered an important part of the family, now said nothing to explain. She sat quietly, looking at me with cold eyes. I could feel her indifference. All the promises she made before now seemed like a joke. She had said she would love me like her own mother, but now she stood there in silence as if I no longer mattered to her. Elaine, you need to understand that we need our own space. You can't keep intervening in our lives like this, Rebecca said, her tone cold and blunt. Her words felt like a punch to my heart. I never thought I would hear this from someone I had once considered a daughter. I'm not the type to intervene, but I've always wanted to understand my son's life. I wanted to know what he was doing, to share important moments with him. But now, I felt like I was no longer a part of their lives. I sat quietly, not saying anything. Every word they spoke felt like a knife stabbing into my heart. The air in the room was thick, tense. I felt like I couldn't breathe anymore. I couldn't bear this coldness and avoidance any longer. I stood up, saying nothing more. Everything was already clear. I couldn't continue living in this false relationship. I couldn't accept the betrayal and lack of respect I had received. The relationship between me and David, between me and Rebecca, was no longer what it used to be. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't live in this pain anymore. It was time for me to stand up, take back my life, and find myself again. A week passed since the meeting with David and Rebecca. Each day, I woke up with a suffocating feeling in my chest, as if a heavy stone was pressing down on me. I no longer found peace in my daily activities. Every step I took in the house, every morning I woke up, every time I went into the garden to care for the flowers, I felt like something was wrong. I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. David and Rebecca's words kept repeating in my head. They were like a wound, slowly bleeding, and it felt like it would never heal. At that moment, I realized something important. I couldn't continue living in this unconditional sacrifice any longer. I had spent my whole life for this family, setting aside my own needs to devote myself to them. But now, I felt like a shadow, like someone who no longer mattered. I couldn't live like this anymore. If I didn't change, I would be swallowed up by the very people I loved the most. I needed to take back control of my life, and that meant making difficult decisions. After many sleepless nights of thinking, I decided to meet with lawyer Rachel. I couldn't handle this on my own. I needed legal help, someone who could protect my interests and help me stand firm against the challenges ahead. Rachel was a well-known lawyer in the city, and I had known her for a while, though only through a few casual meetings. But I didn't hesitate to ask her for help. I needed the support of a professional to handle this situation in a rational way. When I walked into Rachel's office, I felt a bit nervous, but there was also a determination in me that I had never had before. She was waiting for me in the room, her gaze professional, yet full of empathy. She smiled as I walked in, and I felt as though I had found a companion in this battle. "Elaine, thank you for coming," Rachel said gently. "Tell me about the issue you're facing. We'll figure out a way to help you." I took a deep breath and then told her everything, from discovering the messages between David and Rebecca to the tense conversation I had with them. I talked about the feeling of betrayal, about the pain of realizing that the people I loved the most were deceiving me. I spoke of the ambiguity in my relationship with my son, about how much I had sacrificed only to receive coldness and disrespect in return. Rachel listened carefully, not interrupting, just nodding in agreement with what I said. When I stopped, she looked at me sincerely. Elaine, I understand this is a very difficult time for you, but you need to realize that when someone feels deceived and disrespected, they have the right to protect their interests, especially when, as you've said, these people are taking advantage of your kindness. You need boundaries. You must be firm in protecting yourself. Rachel's words were like a flicker of light in the darkness. I had always feared confronting my loved ones, but she made me realize that I had the right to stand up for myself. I didn't have to continue living like a shadow, nor did I have to let myself be forgotten. Elaine, I think it's time you cut all financial ties with them. Everything about property ownership, especially your house, needs to be clarified. You can't continue living like this, where the people you love are taking advantage of you. Her words were like a slap in the face, but they were exactly what I needed to hear. I needed to learn how to say no without feeling guilty. I needed to change, and I needed to do it now. After the meeting with Rachel, I decided to act immediately. I contacted the bank to cut off the joint accounts I had with David. I also asked them to stop any unauthorized spending that I hadn't agreed to. Every time I signed a document, my hand trembled slightly, but I knew these were the necessary steps to reclaim my life. That day, I also decided to change the door lock. I installed a new security camera system to ensure no one could enter the house without my permission. These measures not only protected my property, but also served as a way to protect myself, to protect the freedom I had lost over so many years. That evening, I received a call from David. His voice sounded hurried, as if he was worried about something. "Mom, I need some money to pay for the rent. Can you help me?" These words made my heart feel like it was being squeezed. I should have felt sympathy for my son, but this time, I felt an uncontrollable anger. I had been too accommodating, too giving, and yet all I received in return was deception and exploitation. "I can't help you anymore, David," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart felt like it was breaking. "I've made my decision. I can't keep living your life anymore. I need to live my own life." A silence lingered for a moment, then David hung up without saying another word. That silence felt like a heavy stone falling, but I didn't feel relieved, just empty. I knew my decision wouldn't be accepted by them, but I also knew I couldn't continue living in this blindness anymore. Soon after, Rebecca called me. Her voice was full of anger and reproach. "Don't you love us? How could you do this to your own son?" The feelings of hurt and anger in me grew stronger. I no longer felt the need to explain. "Rebecca," I said, my voice no longer gentle, "I love you, but I can't live your life. I need to live my own life." Once again, she was silent, and then finally, she spat out a sentence full of hatred. "You'll regret this decision." I hung up the phone without feeling regret. My house was now filled with silence, but I felt liberated. The freedom I had never dared to dream of. I no longer had to live for others. I no longer had to sacrifice for people who didn't appreciate me. A week passed since I decided to cut off all financial support to David and Rebecca. I lived each day with a sense of half peace, half tense. Even though I had made the firm decision that I couldn't continue living with unconditional sacrifice, I couldn't deny that with each passing day, I felt more and more lost. A noticeable change had taken place within me. I was no longer the woman I once was. always easily accepting every request and need from my son. But still, I felt a rising loneliness each day, a void that I couldn't easily shake off. The garden remained as it always had, calm and full of life. The rose bushes were still blooming, and the vegetables I had carefully nurtured day by day were still bearing fruit. But I felt like a ghost, standing outside of this life, lost in my own home. The flowers I had planted, the leaves I had tended, no longer brought me the joy they once did. They were still growing well, but I couldn't feel the happiness of watching them. All I felt was emptiness and a persistent loneliness. That morning, as I was drinking my coffee, I heard the doorbell ring. I didn't expect anyone to visit at this hour. An uneasy feeling rose within me, an inexplicable sense of worry. When I went to open the door, I saw David and Rebecca standing there, their faces expressionless. There were no familiar smiles, no warm greetings like before. They just stood there, as if they had prepared for a confrontation. "Mom, we need to talk." David spoke first, but his voice no longer held the warmth it once did. He seemed to be struggling to control the anger within him. I could feel it just from his tone. "What's going on, David?" I tried to stay calm, but inside, my mind was swirling with anxious thoughts. Why had they come to find me, if not to argue about what had happened? Rebecca stood beside David, her eyes filled with contempt. She didn't speak right away, but her silence made the atmosphere even more suffocating. I didn't know what to do or what to say. The tension in the room felt like a tightly pulled string, waiting for something to happen. "Mom, I don't understand how you could do this," David continued, his voice becoming sharper. "I need you, don't you know? Why would you do this to me? You've cut off your financial support. You've abandoned me when I needed you the most. Don't you love me anymore?" Each of his words cut into my heart like a knife. I should have felt some sorrow, some regret, but instead, all I felt was anger rising within me. I had given too much, sacrificed too much, and now, this is how I was being treated. As a mother, I always wanted my son to understand that my love wasn't unconditional sacrifice. But now, I realized my son didn't understand that. He saw me as a provider, a tool to be used when needed. "I love you, David, but I can't live your life anymore," I said, my voice more determined than ever. "I've done my best, spent my whole life taking care of you, but I can't continue living in this exploitation." David looked at me, his eyes no longer filled with love, but disappointment and anger. I could see he was struggling with mixed emotions inside, but I couldn't remain silent anymore. I couldn't keep living blindly, letting them do whatever they wanted without receiving the respect I deserved. "I'm not hurting you, David," I said, even though my heart felt like it was breaking. "I just want you both to stand on your own, to take care of your own lives. I've given enough, and now I need to live for myself." Rebecca spoke at that moment, but her voice was cold and full of hatred. "Elaine, you can't do this. You can't keep interfering in our lives like this. You're selfish, Elaine. You've abandoned us. You've abandoned your son." Rebecca's words felt like a blow, but I wouldn't let myself fall. I had become strong enough to stand up and protect myself. I couldn't let them keep using me anymore. "I haven't abandoned anyone, Rebecca," I replied firmly. "I love you both, but love doesn't mean sacrificing everything. I can't keep living your life. I need to live for myself." She didn't answer. only glared at me with hatred, as if angry that she couldn't make me change my mind. Her eyes seemed to tell me that I was wrong, that I would regret this decision. But I didn't feel regret. I couldn't continue living in submission and unconditional sacrifice. It was time for me to find myself again. David and Rebecca didn't say anything more. They turned and walked away, not a word of goodbye, not a warm glance. I stood still, watching them leave. Although my heart ached, I didn't feel regret. The emptiness filled the room, but it didn't bring me down. I had made my decision, and I couldn't go back. After they left, I sat down in the chair, not knowing what to do next. The whole house felt empty now, but another feeling rose within me, a feeling of freedom. I no longer had to live for anyone. It was time for me to start living for myself. That day, I did something I had never dared to do before. I went out and bought myself a new watch, something I had long dreamed of. This was the first time I spent money on myself without thinking of anyone else. I felt like a woman who was finding herself again. In the evening, I sat in my garden, gazing at the night sky. The stars twinkling above made me feel at peace, even though there was still a bit of regret in my heart. But I knew I had done the right thing. My life was now mine, and I would never allow anyone to take my freedom from me again. Although my decision had been made, the reality of it was not as simple as I had imagined. After cutting off financial support to David and Rebecca, my life no longer resembled the peaceful days of the past. What seemed like small, harmless moments made me realize that I was entering an unavoidable battle. And this battle wasn't just within me, but also on the legal battlefield. After deciding to meet with lawyer Rachel, I knew there was no turning back. Rachel was someone I trusted completely, and I knew that in this fight, she was the only one who could help me protect my rights. But when I stepped into her office, the feeling of anxiety was unavoidable. Even though I knew I was doing the right thing, I couldn't deny that I was still scared. I was facing the people I had loved my whole life, and they were not as simple as I thought. Rachel sat across from me, her gaze gentle, but also resolute. She had prepared a stack of documents, and I knew that things were about to get much more serious. She began explaining the next steps in the process of protecting my assets. She spoke about rewriting my will, changing bank accounts, and protecting the house I had spent my life building. Every word she said reminded me of the gravity of the situation, and I knew that I couldn't back down. Mom, we'll face many challenges, but don't worry. I will help you protect your rights, Rachel said firmly. The feeling I had at that moment was indescribable. It was anxiety, pain, and a bit of hope. I didn't want my life to come to this, but I also knew that if I did nothing, I would have nothing left but suffering and endless criticism. I had lived too long sacrificing for others without receiving anything in return. And now it was time for me to take back power, to take back my life. Right after that, I began to take action. I contacted the bank to change all the accounts that David and I had opened together. The feeling I had when I sat at the bank counter, signing the asset transfer papers, didn't feel like a normal decision. My hands trembled as I signed, but I also felt a sense of liberation. Each signature was a firm step on the path I had chosen. I couldn't turn back. I couldn't continue living in the shadow of sacrifice without receiving anything. In addition to changing the bank accounts, I also decided to change the door locks and install a security camera system around the house. This was a preventive step to protect myself from any intrusion by the people I once loved. I hadn't expected to have to live in such vigilance, but this was the truth I had to face. Each day, I had to deal with legal documents. The calls from Rachel helped me understand more about the complex legal process I had to go through. She always remained calm and determined, and, thanks to her, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. But even so, I couldn't deny that I was exhausted. Every meeting, every phone call drained me. I could no longer focus on work or family. Now, I was facing a difficult legal battle. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Rebecca's lawyer. The feeling I had when I opened that letter was a combination of anger and pain. In the letter, they accused me of being an irresponsible mother, cutting off financial support, and not fulfilling my duties as a mother. The words in the letter made me furious, but I also knew that this was part of the battle. People didn't understand that I had sacrificed so much for this family, and now it was time for me to stop. The feeling of being condemned made me fall into a state of emptiness, but I also knew I couldn't let myself be defeated. If I stepped back, I would lose everything. Rachel advised me not to react hastily, not to let emotions control my decisions. Elaine, this is just their way of putting pressure on you. You don't need to worry about these accusations. You have the right to protect yourself, and we'll continue on the path we've chosen. Stay calm, Rachel said. Even so, I couldn't avoid the frustration I felt when facing their accusations and threats each day. Every time I opened the door to receive their letters, I felt a sense of suffocation, but I also knew that these challenges wouldn't be easy to overcome. Everything was just beginning. On the last day of the month, I went to court for the hearing. The feeling of walking into the courtroom was unforgettable. The court wasn't just the place where I resolved legal conflicts, but it was also the place where I had to face accusations, criticisms, and everything I had tried to avoid for so long. I wasn't the weak woman I once was, but I still couldn't help but feel nervous when I saw the gazes around me. For the first time in my life, I had to stand before a jury, publicly defending my rights. As my lawyer presented evidence and arguments to protect me, I felt a certain sense of liberation. Every step I took, every word I spoke mattered, and I couldn't let myself be defeated. This was my only chance to stand up and say that I didn't regret what I had done. After a long day in court, the hearing ended, and we waited for the verdict. At that moment, I didn't know what the outcome would be, but I knew I had done everything I could to protect myself. Whether I won or lost, I hadn't backed down. I had learned how to stand firm, how to protect what was mine. The next day, I received the court's ruling. The words of the judge felt like a gust of fresh air blowing through my heart. The ruling was in my favor. I had the right to keep my assets, and David no longer had the right to touch anything of mine. A part of me felt relieved, but another part of me wasn't entirely happy. Even though I won, I couldn't say I was joyful. I had lost a large part of my life, the relationship with my son. Nevertheless, I felt liberated. I had regained control. I had taken back my life. The pain was still there, but I knew I had done the right thing. And now, I would never let myself go back to unconditional sacrifice. Never let anyone exploit me again. In the days following my decision to cut off all financial ties with David and Rebecca, My life became a storm I couldn't control. Although I knew I had done the right thing, the reality was that I never imagined this battle would push me to the very limits of my patience and emotions. I thought I would break free from exploitation, free from blind love without respect, but I never expected to pay such a high price for my decisions. Things didn't stop at criticisms or betrayal from loved ones. They escalated into a relentless legal battle, where I had to face an entirely different side of my family. When I received the court summons one morning at the beginning of the month, my heart sank. I couldn't believe things had come to this. The court wasn't just a place to resolve financial issues or disputes over rights. The court was where I would face the truth about my relationship with David, where lies would be exposed, and I knew I wouldn't walk out feeling relieved. I prepared thoroughly for that day. Although I had done everything I could to protect my assets and rights, I couldn't deny that I was still anxious. I feared facing my own son, afraid that this would make our relationship irreparable. But I also knew that this was the moment I had to stand firm. I could no longer live in confusion and fear. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As I walked into the courthouse, everything around me seemed to blur. Not because I was scared, but because the tension in the air was so heavy. I could feel the discomfort from those around me, the curious glances, the whispered conversations. But I didn't care about them. I only cared about the one thing I needed to resolve: the truth between David and me. When I entered the courtroom, I saw David already sitting there. His face no longer carried the strength and confidence it once had. He looked tired, his eyes no longer glimmering with pride. Instead, his eyes were filled with anxiety and tension. My heart ached when I looked into his eyes. After all, he was my son, the one I had poured all my love and hope into. But now I was facing a completely different person. A person who no longer wanted to share the important moments of his life with me. Rebecca sat beside him, her face equally uncomfortable. She looked at me with eyes full of hatred, as if I were the one who had done everything wrong. But I no longer felt afraid of her gaze. I had made my decision. This wasn't just a fight to protect my assets. It was a fight to keep my dignity and respect. I sat down in the chair across from them, feeling the tension in the room. It was then that I realized I wasn't just fighting to protect the house. I was fighting to protect myself. Throughout my life, I had done everything for this family, but I realized I could no longer live in the shadow of others. I had to learn to live for myself, not for those who didn't appreciate me. As the trial began, my lawyer stood up to make her opening statement, and I could clearly feel that this was a turning point in my life. Every word she said felt like a sworn declaration of the truth I had buried for so long. She presented all the evidence of David and Rebecca's exploitation, of the times I had financially supported them without receiving any respect in return. Each word from my lawyer was like waking me from a long sleep, making me realize that I had lived too long in unconditional sacrifice, receiving nothing in return. Although I didn't want to look at David, I couldn't help but notice the unease in his eyes. He lowered his head, as if he couldn't face me anymore. That was when I realized that things could never go back to how they were. His words, his actions, everything had made this relationship complicated. I was no longer the mother he could rely on any time. All of this had been created by him. As the trial continued, Rebecca stood up and began speaking. She was no longer the gentle wife I had once loved. Instead, she was a woman filled with anger, criticizing every decision I had made. My mother cut off financial support to us. And not only that, she's hurt the whole family. She can't keep acting selfishly like this. She's hurt us, and she will pay for what she's done. Her words were like a slap to my face, but I wouldn't allow myself to falter. Yes, I had hurt them, but they had hurt me just as much. These criticisms couldn't make me change my mind. I had sacrificed too much, and I couldn't continue living in exploitation. When I cut off financial support, I never meant to hurt anyone. I just wanted to protect myself, I said, my voice firm. My love is not unconditional sacrifice. I have lived in their shadow for too long. I've done everything for them. But now, I need to live for myself. The room fell silent, and I could feel everyone's gaze on me. My words were like a declaration of change. Everything had to end now. Not the end of love, but the end of unconditional sacrifice, the end of enduring without receiving anything. When the trial ended, I didn't feel joyful. Even though I had won, I knew this victory wasn't the end of everything. It was just the first step in a long journey to reclaim myself. I had regained control of my assets, but I knew that the most important thing I had regained was my freedom. I no longer had to live under the pressure of endless sacrifice. I was no longer a mother who only worried about her children at the cost of herself. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a sense of liberation. Not because I had won the trial, but because I had stood up for myself. I had not allowed anyone to take away my right to live, my freedom, and the respect I deserved. Since I cut off all financial ties with David and Rebecca, my life has completely changed. However, not every change has been easy. Although this decision helped me protect my interests and reestablish my self-worth, it also brought a series of consequences I had never imagined. The painful emotions and loneliness began to pile up. What once seemed like a peaceful life has now become a journey of seeking healing, a liberation not only physically, but also mentally. The first days after making that decision were days I had to face sorrow and emptiness. When the house became silent, I realized I had lived too long in the shadows of others, sacrificing everything to make my family happy while forgetting myself. I couldn't clearly remember the last time I felt truly free, not thinking about pleasing others. Now, the house no longer echoed with David and Rebecca's laughter. The evenings when I cooked and we gathered together are now replaced with lonely hours, and I was left only with myself. The first day after cutting contact with my son, I spent the whole day lying on the sofa, staring out at the window, doing nothing. The feeling of emptiness was so overwhelming that I thought I couldn't bear it. I thought about everything I had missed. The years I devoted to the family, the times I believed I was the center, the one person who could make everything right. But now, all that remained was the frightening silence and questions I couldn't answer. I remembered the time when David was little, when I did everything to raise him, teach him, and guide him from his first steps to adulthood. I never imagined I would find myself in this situation. I had devoted everything to the family without complaint. Yet now I felt abandoned, forgotten. I couldn't live in this feeling forever. Even though I knew my decision was right, I still had to face an unavoidable pain. I felt like an outsider in my own family. They didn't need me anymore, and I had to learn to live with that. In the early days after making my decision, I began to rediscover hobbies I had neglected. One of the things I decided to do was start gardening, something I had loved for a long time but never had enough time to pursue. I remembered how I used to tend to the garden with love and care. But now, as I entered the garden without anyone's hands to help, I felt a strange silence. However, the flowers still bloomed, the trees were still lush, and in every beat of the soil and plants, I realized that I, too, needed to care for myself. Each morning, I woke up and spent time tending to every flower, every branch in the garden. Every time I tilled the soil, every time I pruned the trees, I felt as though I was nurturing my own soul. I began to understand that, just like the plants in the garden, I too needed to be nurtured. I had forgotten myself for too long, and now it was time to find myself again. One of the things I did to help myself relax was to join a cooking class. This was an activity I had wanted to try for a long time, but never had the time for. Cooking, for me, was not just about preparing delicious meals, but also a form of self-care. In each dish, I found the creativity and relaxation that I had missed for so long. The meals I made were no longer just food. They were gifts I gave to myself. Additionally, I joined a support group for those going through family crises. The first time I went to the group, I felt a bit anxious and confused. I was used to keeping everything inside, but this time I decided to open up. The conversations in the group not only helped me share my sorrows and struggles, but also helped me reevaluate myself. Each member's story had a common thread: suffering, loss, but they also taught me that we can heal, no matter our age, no matter how deep the wounds are. It was an awakening for me. I realized that, even though I had gone through much pain, I could still find light in the darkness. Healing is not a short journey. It took me a long time to face my emotions, but with each passing day, I began to feel stronger. I learned not to let the past dictate my future, to love myself without feeling guilty. The long silent days helped me realize that I no longer had to please anyone. I no longer had to live in anyone's shadow. And then, one day, I realized that I no longer felt pain when thinking about David and Rebecca. I no longer felt I lacked their love or attention. The wounds were still there, but they no longer made me fall. I had learned to accept that some people cannot bring peace to my life. I didn't have to force myself in unhealthy relationships, and I didn't have to keep sacrificing myself for those who didn't appreciate me. Gradually, I began to find joy in simple things. I traveled alone, exploring places I had always wanted to visit, but never had the chance. I began meeting new friends, people who shared values with me. I no longer felt lonely. I understood that love and respect start with myself, and I had learned how to love myself. Each day that passed, I felt a rebirth in my soul. I no longer felt abandoned or lost. I had found myself again, a strong, confident woman who knew her worth. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled my life. I was no longer just a mother or a wife. I was Elaine, a woman who had learned to stand up and live for herself. And when I sat in my garden one afternoon, watching the sunset, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. The feeling that I had done the right thing, that I was living my own life, not for anyone else, but because I deserved a full and complete life. After everything that has happened, after the pain and loss, I have learned one important thing. Love doesn't just take one form, and neither does friendship. There were times when I thought that love could only exist within family relationships, with those closest to me whom I gave my all to. But now, I realize that love can come from anywhere, from people I never expected, and sometimes it comes in moments I never anticipated. My life now is no longer the same as it was before. After the trial and the tense encounters with David and Rebecca, I no longer have to live in the shadows of sacrifice and exploitation. I've spent more time taking care of myself, finding joy in the small things, and most importantly, I've learned how to love myself. But still, I can't deny that loneliness occasionally makes me feel lost. Although I've resolved many issues in my life, there are still times when I feel the need for a companion, someone to share both the joys and sorrows with, someone who can understand me without judgment. And then I found friendship, not a simple one, but a real friendship built on understanding and deep empathy. A few months ago, when I joined a support group for women who had gone through family crises, I never thought I would find such a sincere friendship. At first, I went there only seeking empathy, trying to find a way to deal with the sadness and pain in my heart. But unexpectedly, I met an amazing group of people, ones with whom I could share everything without fear of being judged. Every time I met with them, I felt like I was coming back to life, like I was no longer alone in my own battle. One of the friends I connected with deeply was Linda, a woman in her 40s who had gone through a difficult divorce and was now trying to rebuild her life. Linda and I quickly became close friends, sharing everything about life, the pains, and challenges we had both faced. She was always a genuine listener, without judgment, and that made me feel so warm. In the evenings, we would sit together, drink tea, and talk about the little things in life, but also about the lessons we had learned during our journeys to reclaim ourselves. Linda was not only a friend, but also a sister, a mentor I had never had before. This friendship taught me that, in life, sometimes we need true friends to share with and to receive empathy in return. Friendship is not easily attained, but when found, it is the most solid thing. The feeling of having someone by your side, not to criticize or condemn, but to walk with you, support you, made me feel like I was no longer alone. I no longer felt like I had to force myself to hide my pain, because with Linda and my other friends, I understood that I didn't have to. I could be myself, share all my thoughts and feelings without fear or worry about being judged. In the months that followed, I also realized that true love is not just about family or romantic relationships. Love can come from sharing, from caring for and loving yourself, and from opening up to sincere friends who come into your life. But I also can't deny that sometimes love comes unexpectedly from relationships you never expected. I no longer expected a romantic love because I thought I was too tired of such relationships. But life has its surprises, and one of the greatest surprises in my life came when I met Ethan. Ethan was a man I met at a charity event that I attended with my group of friends. We happened to meet when I was learning about a project that supported women entrepreneurs. Ethan was a very special man. He was not only smart, but also very perceptive and warm. We quickly struck up a conversation, and I felt a connection from the very first moment. It wasn't a romantic connection, but a deep understanding of life and what we had both gone through. Ethan wasn't someone I could immediately talk to easily, but when he opened up and shared his challenges in life, I felt a strange sense of empathy. He didn't judge me, didn't offer advice, but simply listened. And that made me feel very warm. We started talking more, meeting more often, and over time, I realized that I had become comfortable being around him. We weren't rushing with this relationship. Every meeting was an opportunity for me to get to know him better, to understand his life, and, more importantly, to understand myself. He never pressured me, and I didn't feel like I had to change to please him. This relationship, even though it had just begun, made me feel like I was being loved sincerely, not because of any reason other than real affection. Ethan was not a perfect man. He had his own wounds and pains, but he taught me that sometimes we don't need to look for a perfect love to be happy. True love is when you can accept each other with all the imperfections and face the difficulties together. The feeling of being loved sincerely, of sharing and walking alongside someone, is what I found in Ethan. As the months passed, I gradually realized that the things I once thought were important, like family acceptance, the perfection of relationships, no longer held the weight they once did. What I really needed was to love and care for myself. And friendship, the love from those around me, were the things that helped me rebuild my life. I no longer had to fear facing the future. Even though there were times I still felt regret about what I had lost, I knew that I had learned a valuable lesson. Love doesn't always come from family, but from the relationships you build over time, from empathy and sincere sharing. My life has changed so much since I decided to step out of the shadow of those I had devoted my heart and life to. I fought not only for my assets, but for myself, for the rights I deserve to have. And even though sometimes I feel tired, I have never regretted my decision. Every step, no matter how small, is an important stride toward living for myself, not for others. Over the past months, I have learned many things about myself, love, and forgiveness. Looking back on my journey, I realized that the greatest lesson I've learned is self-respect. Before, I lived for my family, for my children, for others, but I forgot one important thing. I must live for myself first. I used to think that love meant sacrificing everything, that love should always put others before oneself. But now, I understand that no love is complete without self-respect. When you don't love yourself, when you don't place your own value at the top, you'll easily be hurt and exploited. This doesn't mean I don't love those I have spent my life caring for, but rather, I've learned to love and care for myself first. If I can't love myself, I can't love anyone sincerely and fully. Every morning, I wake up and ask myself a simple question. Today, am I loving myself? This isn't an easy question to answer, but every day, I try to answer it with some action to affirm that love. It could be a relaxing morning in the garden, a long walk in the park, or simply an evening for myself with a good book and a cup of hot tea. Each of those moments is a way I remind myself that I deserve love and care. The question of self-respect is also connected to another important thing I've learned on this journey: forgiveness. Forgiveness is not only about forgiving those who have hurt me, but more importantly, it is about learning to forgive myself. Over many years, I lived with guilt and regret. I asked myself if I had done enough for my family, if I was good enough, if I had been wrong to love and sacrifice too much. These questions haunted me for a long time, and they were the biggest barriers I had to overcome. But then I realized one thing. I can't change the past, The decisions I made, the sacrifices I made are all part of my life's journey. And if I can't change the past, I can change the way I view it. Forgiving myself means accepting that I did my best with the circumstances I had, and I cannot blame myself for those choices. I loved with all my heart, and that's the only thing I could do. When I learned to forgive myself, I also learned to forgive those who had hurt me. Yes, I had been betrayed, exploited, but I couldn't keep living in anger and pain. Forgiveness doesn't mean I forget what happened, but it means I allow myself to free myself from negative emotions. Forgiveness is an act of freedom, helping me break free from the inner turmoil so I can live a life not haunted by the past. Forgiveness and self-respect are two things I must continuously learn and practice. Every day, I face myself and ask if I am living according to the values I have set. I had lived for others for so long, living in the expectations and demands of those around me. But now, I understand that only when I live true to myself can I bring true happiness. The people around me, whether they love or betray me, cannot decide my life. I am the only one with the right to do that. Gradually, I also realized that not everyone in this life can bring me the peace I seek. That's a truth I didn't want to accept. But now I understand that only when I learn to love myself can I create peace from within. I no longer need to seek validation or love from anyone other than myself. If I can't feel peace and happiness when I'm alone, I will never find it in relationships with others. This was a hard but incredibly important lesson, and that is why I have started to feel peace returning to my heart. Although there are still many wounds that haven't healed and many painful memories, I've learned to live with them instead of letting them control my life. I no longer fear. I no longer feel guilty for the decisions I've made, and I no longer live in the shadow of unconditional sacrifice. Looking back on my journey, I realized that even though there were times I fell, I still stood up. I didn't allow myself to be defeated by anyone, and I didn't let past events affect my future. My life is not a story of sacrifice and endurance. My life is a story of freedom, self-respect, and healing. During this time, I also realized that sometimes letting go is the way we move forward. Letting go is not about giving up, but an act of liberation. In order to heal, in order to move forward, I must let go of what no longer serves me. And although it wasn't easy, it was an important step I've taken. Today, as I sit in my garden, watching the sunset, I feel a peace I've never had before. Not because I've forgotten everything, but because I've accepted what has happened, and I'm living with it calmly. I know that life will continue with challenges and pain, but I've learned to stand firm, love myself, and live for me. And in that moment, I realized that I'm not just living for myself, but also living to teach those around me that true love begins with oneself, and that forgiveness is a gift we give to our own hearts. It is time for me to let go of all that is old and no longer serves my life. The months of struggle were not just a battle with David, Rebecca, or the wounds from the past, but also a battle with myself. It was a fight to find myself again, to love myself once more, to affirm that I deserve to live a life that is free, peaceful, and full of happiness. I once thought that my life would never return to normal after the sorrow and loss. But now, I realize that the truth is not about what I lost, but about what I've found again. I have found strength, resilience, And most importantly, I have learned to love myself. Not because I've forgiven anyone, but because I have learned to forgive myself. This journey is not a story of revenge. It is not about making anyone regret their actions. It is a story of liberation, of no longer allowing the past to control my future. I no longer need validation from anyone. I only need peace within myself. And that is the greatest victory. Though life may still be difficult, and though sometimes the old memories still bring me pain, I have learned how to stand firm. I know that it is forgiveness and self respect that will help me continue moving forward. And now, I no longer look back. I only look forward, where I will rebuild my life. My story could be the story of many people. We all have experienced hurt and loss, but I believe that each of us has the ability to rise up and keep moving forward. Remember that healing is not a destination, but a journey. A journey that, when we dare to face ourselves and love ourselves, will lead us to true freedom. If you have ever felt hurt, abandoned, or are looking for ways to overcome pain, share your story with me. You are not alone in this fight. Let our stories empower one another, and together, let us walk the path of healing. Thank you for walking with me on this journey. Your comments, your shares, are invaluable sources of strength that help me grow stronger every day. Let us explore together the power of forgiveness, self-respect, and most importantly, love. Love for ourselves.